Hello, and welcome to the first session of Entangled Legacies with Anna-Sophie Springer. Um, so for those, we have two students who are not here right now, so you're watching the archive. Today will be, I believe, a slightly shorter session, just to intro the most of the class, but I'll pass it on to Anna, who will actually give you uh, a better understanding of the whole thing. So, Anna?
Okay, thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. Good to see you over there. So Tony, actually, I go by the name Sophie, so just
Okay, sorry.
for future reference. And hi, Olivia. Hi, Kayla. Can you hear me? Are you mute?
They are muted.
I just muted myself so I don't make weird noises and interrupt everyone. But
Yeah,
yeah, but I'm here.
there you are. Right, and Olivia is on.
Oh, yeah, me too. My neighbor's playing music, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. Great. I have never done a class like this before. I think you are more familiar with that framework. So I've only ever spoken into a class where everybody was sitting in the room and they were in Toronto and I was in Berlin. And I'm in Berlin now, so it's 10 p.m. Speaking of time zones and convenience. And then I have a current intensive reading graduate student in Toronto, so we often Skype and we do one-on-one sessions on Skype, but I've never done a kind of a group thing, so this is quite exciting. And then I don't know how you were able to look at the instructions or the reading at all, and that's why Tony and I made the suggestion earlier to each other that it might make sense to do it a bit shorter today so that we just kind of talk about how we can progress over the sessions, and then do it more properly next time. But I have a little bit prepared something too, and so it might be nice for us to just kind of introduce each other ourselves, and go from there. Does that sound kind of like a good plan? Yeah. Okay. So I'm calling in from Berlin. I work as an independent curator, as an editor, and I run an art press together with an artist from Canada based in Toronto, Charles Stankiewicz, and our press is called Caverlog, and so I work in between curatorial frameworks of exhibition in the gallery space and bookmaking, where the books are also seen as exhibition venues. And the focus of these practices is usually that there's an engagement with either histories or historical archives. So stories and objects. And of course, lots of collaborators. And so Mo invited me to participate in the center and give this class where we're going to kind of look through my practice, but look also at other forms of practice. So not just the work that I've made. And this is why I invited you to go see a show and then let's talk about it. So the offer that I would have is that we combine the sessions in terms of doing readings that I would give you in advance every week, so that we can kind of see where the discussion goes, and I shape the content accordingly. And then the other invitation that I would have is that if you're interested in this, and you can tell me a little bit where you are based and what you're kind of working on besides this seminar. But if you are interested, we could always, for every session, have seen a show, and I can prepare some questions, and then we can use that material for discussions. Sounds good? Okay. And then the other idea was that I might be able to invite a couple guest speakers. people that are working on natural history, post-natural histories, through different kind of lenses or practices. One is a designer, and the other is an artist curator. Has his own space, and so I'm thinking that they could come in for half-hour presentations and kind of give artist talks or practice talks, and then you can engage with them and discuss. Yeah. And so maybe next you want to quickly introduce yourself to me? Do you know each other already, Olivia and Kayla? No, oh no, you have not. Okay, okay, so.
I can go. My name's Olivia. I'm a student in the Art and Curatorial program at the New Center. I'm an artist in LA, and I guess I'm particularly interested in this class because I've worked in museums for like 7 years now, just doing mainly like working as a security guard, and I've been, I guess, critical of the way that the museum is centered so much on interactivity and the way that that's like illusory in a lot of instances, or just like forced participation. So I got a chance to read the Tony Bennett exhibitionary complex piece, and that was right up my alley in terms of like control and surveillance, and I related a lot to that. And I also read your piece on the museum and the archipelago, which I thought was really interesting also. Yeah, so I'm excited.
Great, welcome. And so you're in LA now?
Yeah, I work at MoCA.
Yeah. Did you see the rain piece?
I didn't get a chance to go yet. My friends work there though, and they've been talking about it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a long queue, I heard.
Yeah.
Okay, I can introduce myself also now. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm in Chicago, Illinois right now. I work as the manager of special collections for the library at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So I mostly actually work with a collection of artist publications. And so a lot of what I do involves managing that collection, putting on exhibitions, talking to students about bookmaking projects, and then and working with other archives. And then I'm also an artist and a writer, and so this class sort of combines a lot of my interest in my art and writing practice as well as in my occupation. So yeah, so I'm excited. And I unfortunately got the email right before I left for work this morning. So I was able to read your piece, and I'm looking forward to reading the other ones later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So, so of course you've read my piece because what I was gonna do was the following: contextualize for you why I've chosen those 4 pieces together, and then I was thinking maybe for the next sessions, also depending, it's really depending how many people we're going to be. But those 2 ideas is what I have. One, if I continue with putting 4 readings up, and that's maybe too much for everyone to always go through, my suggestion would be that each of you always chooses 2 or 1. It depends on how many people are going to be there. And then we can relay the reading to the other people so that you would close read 1 and talk it back to the group. And that way, kind of, we would have different perspectives and voices always actively in the space. That would be one suggestion. The other suggestion, and maybe that's what I can do here today, would be to kind of come up with a connectivity between the readings. So how do they resonate? How do they feedback off each other? What kind of ideas are addressed in one piece, and then the other piece might push that into another direction or something. And so if you wanted to read all of it, or if I put only 2, then we can do that. also as a prep. And so what I was just going to do was contextualize the 4 texts as kind of 4 perspectives that I've chosen for a first session to kind of get sort of some basics. This is so Donna Haraway and Tony Bennett. Those are both quite historical perspectives. It doesn't always have to be so historical, but I thought for the first time that can be good. And then I was going to read the museum as archipelago with a really nice slide presentation, which is different from that. Then it's a bit different from just the piece in the book. But if you've already read that and you don't want to do that, then that's fine too. And then we can have questions kind of from that, or a discussion from that, if you wanted to do that. Because I didn't know exactly how this is how prepared everyone is, and so I thought if nobody might have read anything, then we can start with that as the kind of as my voice into it, and then for next class I'm going to prepare a presentation that would be more about my recent projects. So I can talk about the book series Intercalations that I'm co-editing, and a curatorial project dealing with natural history collections and colonial histories, environmental histories. But I wanted to do that next time. Because I think it's better if everyone is prepared a little bit, so that we can have a better feedback on that. And B, because I'm writing a new lecture presentation on that material right now in 2 weeks. And so next week would be 1 week before my 1-hour presentation that I'm giving somewhere else. And so it would be very cool for me to share it with you, kind of workshop it with you next week. Sounds good? Yeah. Okay, great. So the 4 texts exactly. Tony Bennett and the Exhibitionary Complex. He's from '88. I chose that because it gives a perspective of institutional critique of the museum as a technology for organizing vision, things, power, knowledge, time, as well as people. And so he looks at the museum as an institutional space of the state, as an architecture that is built, as an architecture that is that contains certain processes, that organizes certain processes on its inside, where the architecture enters the bodies of the visitors, and that way kind of generates towards the outside formation of the nation state in the 19th century. And so it's a reading through Foucault's work, who, even though I wrote that in my description for the seminar, Foucault is actually not the one who, the first sentence in that description, it's actually not Foucault, it's Bennett through Foucault, who speaks about the museum. Foucault not so much. Of course, more about the carceral archipelago and the panopticon, and then for Bennett, the museum becomes both a panoptic space as well as a panoramic space, so that there's a spectacle and surveillance combined and interacting. And so the argument in there is that whereas the panopticon and the penal scenario of the 18th century worked actively on the body through active punishment, but then in the museum it's a more lithe and integrated inscription into the visitors as a society that's already internalized. So that's the institution. So Bennett for the institutional perspective, and then Donna Haraway goes inside of the museum, right, with the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And so she really puts our focus onto the nature cultures of the museological objects inside of the institution. And then I really suggest you read that, because it's really wonderfully written. It's an older piece by Haraway, and it's about the taxidermy as artifact, and so as nature objects as something that is man-made, and I'm not saying human-made, although I normally always say human-made, or I never say man-made. But in that case, of course, it's also about gender. And so, yeah, the constructedness of these museological objects, as well as biographical connections to Karl Ackerley in that particular case, the famous taxidermist of the early 20th century in America. And then the article from the conversation by Mark Maslin and Simon Lewis, who are both natural scientists from the UK, that was my choice for a perspective onto the recent scientific debate about the Anthropocene as a formal geological unit of time. And if you want, we can also talk about, I'm going to ask that maybe later, how familiar you are with the concept of the Anthropocene. But so, yeah, they first of all introduce the scientific debate about whether in 2016 the Holocene should be exchanged for the Anthropocene officially in a scientific manner. And then why I think that is really, really interesting for us is because not only do they critique the time frame of industrialization and the steam engine as not being precise enough, but they also introduce colonialism as a fundamental geological marking force. And by doing that, towards the end of the text, I think on that it's just 3 pages, right? On the last page, they ask all kinds of questions, or they put into question all of those fundaments or bases on which Tony Bennett's what Tony Bennett talks about. And of course, in the 21st century, we don't have that scenario anymore that Bennett describes in relation to the 19th century. But in that sense, towards the end of, and maybe Olivia, you want to come in and give us a little bit of an analysis of your reading, but towards the end of the Bennett, where he starts to bring in the role of the evolution display and the geological and the archaeological important, so archaeology and geology as important vehicles for narrating, representing ideologies about the nation state. And then Maslin and Lewis come back on exactly those points, but say, well, if colonialism, if we see the Anthropocene as connected to colonialism, or since we can see the Anthropocene as something that has arisen through Euro-colonial engagements, then all of those perspectives that we are so used to and that have been created and fortified over such a long period of time are absolutely necessary to be rethought. And sure, in the humanities and in the arts, we are completely used to that, but those are scientists that say that. And so that's why that is an interesting utterance, interesting statement from their side. And then finally, the museum as archipelago is just, apart from that, your instructor wrote that, it's a perspective on, very much for me, a perspective on the attitude of the curator or the curatorial agent who engages with those complex entanglements of history's objects and institutions. So that's a subject position, but not the subject position of the viewer, but the subject position of somebody who's a maker. And a maker then in a different scenario as Karl Ackerley, the taxidermist, right? But comes in after, and comes in after Bennett, and comes in after, or at this kind of contemporary to Maslin and Lewis and the Anthropocene discourse. And so that's the kind of the 4 corners maybe that I wanted to put around us and use that as a base for discussion. Does that make sense? There's more people in there now.
we have one person who is probably just auditing, just sort of sitting in, which is Manuel. And then the other person is Damon Cook, and he is a new member, so he is sitting in and auditing as well, but he may enroll, it depends.
Okay. Great. So Olivia, do you wanna respond on the Bennett?
Sure. I mean, I guess when you were talking about colonialism, I guess I was interested in the part, the exhibitionary disciplines, and it talks about how the objects are ordered so that it leads up to the triumph of industrial capitalism. I guess it kind of related to your article where you were talking about the connection between maps and exhibitions and kind of like how the curator creates these subjective narratives. And I guess the part that I was most interested in was just the idea that the exhibitionary complex is centered on the idea that everybody can see everything. He talks about like the Crystal Palace and how people could see like the sewers and the morgue and the slaughterhouse, but there were always vantage points that the people who were seeing could always be seen, so they were always under control. And then, yeah, I guess and then the last part that I thought was interesting was the idea that, like, the idea of public museum hours, and that, like, the working class people were instructed to, like, dress up and get out of their working class clothes so as to not, I think he said, soil the art, but also so as to not take away from the spectacle, but become part of the spectacle itself. Those were some of the main points that
Right, and then the counterpoint of that being the fair, and the fun fair, which first was a free space of the kind of outside of that state control, but then through the international exhibitions, which would have a fairground in it, it would become a part. It would be included into that space of control in the same way.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. 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 Kayla, you haven't read that, right?
Yeah, and just to like answer one of your earlier questions, I feel like the reading isn't like an unmanageable amount. It's just since I work 9 to 5, I usually have to get it, and I checked my email for it, and then I guess the email came in at 10:30 p.m. So I saw it this morning. So in the future, I plan to read all of it. I mean, and I like Donna Haraway a lot, so I'm excited to read that one especially. But yeah, I haven't gotten to read any of the text besides the one.
Okay. No, that's totally fine. I mean, I only put those up yesterday, even though I prepared that instruction sheet a week ago. But so the plan would be that for next week we can do those ones again, Donna Haraway and Tony Bennett, and read them as an extra 3 pages. But then I would give you new reading with more time, not the night before, like a week, always the week, so that there would be, right, as one does that normally. Tony?
Yes.
What does it mean when participants all of a sudden show up big on the screen?
So
like,
when they do it's if I have it in conversation mode. So it's when the people speak or there's some noise in the microphone. So right now I'm speaking, and if Kayla or Olivia start speaking, then they would come up.
They come on. Okay. Okay. So then maybe Damon wanted to say something because his screen was big on my screen?
I think I was just playing with my screen here a little bit, trying to work out, you know, maybe I shouldn't be here. I should just be watching, and you know, maybe I'm a bit of a distraction as an auditor. So should I just turn my camera off, maybe?
No, you can just. I'm muting my mic so that I don't, because otherwise I'd probably make a noise and then it'd put me on. So if you just do that, it won't. Yeah.
I'll mute my mic, and I hope if that's cool with you guys, I might mute my camera too, because I'm sort of going to come in and out off the screen a little bit and just listen to you as I'm doing stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sounds interesting. It's Anna. Just one last thing before I go. It's Anna Sophia.
Yeah, but Sophie is enough.
Sophia. The readings. Is it cool if we have a look at those readings also? Are we going to be, maybe that's something that Tony or Jason will discuss, but I haven't had any access to the readings, and I think if I'm going to audit, it makes sense to be doing the readings. Otherwise, I'm just going to be listening to you guys with not such a good sense about what you're talking about.
I'll give you access to the classroom so you can access the readings.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Okay. Cool. All right. Nice to be listening. Thanks, guys.
Great. Okay. Okay. So if you are up for that, I would do the reading of the museum as archipelago with those slides, and then we can have another check-in and talk about it. And then we maybe, yeah, then that session would be shorter than the normal plan of 2.5 hours, but then we can have it properly next time when everyone is prepared. And I'm really excited for you to go see some shows. And oh yeah, so you're in LA and in Chicago, so there are natural history museums there or science museum shows that we can go see, and you can pair them, of course, with something else very easily, right? And okay, awesome. So now there's somebody else on the screen.
Yeah, so now it's Tom McGlynn, who is an instructor with us, also a member. He's So
Nice to meet
Tom,
you.
do you want to introduce yourself?
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Glad I had a chance to participate.
Great. Welcome. Okay, Tony, I'm gonna share my screen. How do I do that?
So it's the if you go to the left of your screen, you'll see there's the chat bar, and under the chat is the green
screen share. Okay.
And then choose the window that you want, or just share the whole thing.
Okay.
Great, you can see it.
Yeah, you see this now?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so the piece is kind of inspired and moves out of that phrase by Edouard Glissant, who was a Caribbean philosopher, who said, "I imagine the museum as an archipelago." In 1948, the geography department at Harvard University was shut down for being hopelessly amorphous and for failing to produce a clear definition of the subject or to determine its boundaries with other disciplines. This essay emerges from a much newer discipline, one that, in contrast to geography, has only just begun to exist as a proper academic field, but that is nevertheless enjoying its precocious status and attracting increasing theoretical interest. With the upstart discipline of curatorial studies, curatorial practice departs from the idea that curating historically entails caring for artifacts within the institution, enabling the current discourse to turn its attention toward investigating and contouring forms of creative and critical agency, thus resulting in the production of knowledge with a performative element that has been called the curatorial. Like geography's struggle for a convincing self-definition in the 1940s, curatorial practice today struggles with its own fluid boundaries. This fluidity, however, is the field's strength. In what follows, I argue that far from being conceived of as a weakness, the openness of contemporary curatorial practice finds a retroactive and productive affirmation in the geographic and spatial theories that distinguish between settler and indigenous cartographies. Most fundamentally, a map is an eidetic, visual, but also mental representation of an area. Such a form of representation is connected to an activity of production, including navigational devices and models of surroundings, that is nearly as old as recorded history. But maps, whether we look at Roman, Greek, Chinese, or early European explorers, have also been important weapons of imperialism and tools for projecting power knowledge, enabling and expanding the scope and violence of countless colonial endeavors. In fact, it was during the colonial scramble of the 19th century that a pen across a map could determine the lives and deaths of millions of people. In this instance, the map both anticipated and actualized processes of human cultural intervention, rendering them conceivable and actionable. Despite this material actualization, however, it is important to stress that maps are, in a large part, fictions of factual conditions. As man-made interpretations of the world, they foreground certain elements while leaving out others. What this means is that a map is not simply a mirror image of the world, but a creation with semantic, symbolic, and instrumental content. Therefore, maps do not represent anything. Instead, they produce effects by organizing knowledge and constructing perspectives. They are performative tools that can both frame and undo territories. Read optimistically, every map has the potential to produce a new and different world. One such example is R. Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map of 1933. While our common Mercator projection privileges Europe and North America through orientation and distortion, Fuller's projection unfolds the Earth into a polydirectional icosahedron, depicting the 7 continents as a chain of islands, and the oceans as a connected, fluid mass. The triangles of the map can be rotated towards each other in different ways, each time offering a radically different, but always valid, configuration, making the Dymaxion map a rare specimen of a world map that does not depend on a predetermined perspectival center. It is exactly this kind of approach to mapping that Deleuze and Guattari encourage in their groundbreaking text Rhizome, in which they use the concept of map and rhizome almost interchangeably over several passages. And I quote, "Make a map, not a tracing. What distinguishes the map from the tracing is that it is entirely oriented towards an experimentation in contact with the real. The map is open and connectable in all of its dimensions. It is detachable, reversible, susceptible to constant modification. It can be torn, reversed, adapted to any kind of mounting, reworked by an individual, group, or social formation. The map has to do with performance, whereas the tracing always involves an alleged competence." So according to Deleuze and Guattari, a tracing is nothing more than a reductive reproduction of given assumptions. Making a map, on the other hand, becomes a productive and often physical engagement with a territory that conditions the rhythmic relations of time and space. Deleuze and Guattari's laudatory estimation of the practice of mapping finds ample support within the history of cartography. The Polynesian stick chart, for example, emphasizes subjectivity, embodiment, direct experience, and connectivity. Used at least until the end of World War II to canoe from atoll to atoll and island to island in the Marshall Island region of the Pacific Ocean, these maps were constructed as open frameworks from coconut fronds and tiny seashells to symbolize ocean swells and the waves and crest patterns of the ocean surface. Made by the navigators themselves, these maps reflected their individual physical experience in the open sea, varying so much in interpretation and form that they were readable solely to the author-cartographer. Contrary to many other navigation techniques, the charts were not taken along on trips but studied and memorized prior to departure, and the navigator would lie down in the canoe during the voyage to feel how the boat was moved about by the underlying ebb and flow. While this practice makes the map a biogeographical tool, rendering it personal and idiosyncratic, it nevertheless suggests that these personal cartographies were crucial devices for creating a network of intra-island communication. Voyages and Charts. The epigraph by Michel Serres. Perhaps there never was a very first voyage that scattered the seeds of human habitation in the world's space. But we do know of the last of them, of poles conquered, deserts crossed, wilderness invaded. This is the end of all voyages. All possible encounters have been accomplished, undertaken, ended, foreclosed. The cycle is completed. The map of the Earth has been covered. The map of the Earth has covered the Earth. Space is inscribed upon the charts. The globe is perceived as a ball in a net of latitudes and longitudes. The tension between voyages and charts is well documented by David Neufeld, a historian of the Western Arctic and Yukon Territory. His text, Learning to Drive the Yukon River, Western Cartography and Athabascan Story Maps, examines how artifacts and landscapes necessarily embody different, possibly conflicting cultural narratives, and it questions how to deal with these differences productively. Through his estimation of cartographic difference, the practice of the curator finds especially valuable clues. By remaining particularly sensitive to the idea that different people's stories and histories have shaped the way they experience, understand, and respond to the physical world, to quote by Neufeld, curators can unfold new relations to previously discounted modes of knowledge production and dissemination, and the values that attend to them. Neufeld uses a comparison between settler and native mapping techniques from the Dawson City region as a means to discuss issues of identity and cultural and environmental coexistence in the area of the Yukon River. The quintessential experience that he recounts from his fieldwork revolves around the oral instructions given to him from an indigenous elder on how to navigate the site of his historical and anthropological research. When consulted, the man uses a stick to scribble a pattern of a crucial part of the Yukon River, a conglomeration of sandbars and islands, into the ground. So the image you see here is exactly that area of the ground that he scribbled into. To the historian, these signs are as cryptic as the advice he sent on his way with, which goes like this. Just watch the island in front of you, and when it starts to move, turn and head towards the next island. And when that island starts to move, turn away, and you are through. When Neufeld and his team reach the area by boat, the sandbars do indeed appear, shift, and disappear in the water. But by following the instructions, the boat actually makes it through the tricky area without running aground. In retrospect, Neufeld tries in vain to find a rational explanation for the encountered phenomena and states instead that the elder's experiential description is less about objective investigation than about journeys and the relationships exercised during travel. While the First Nations riverman's story map of moving islands conveys his knowledge as conditioned by a participatory relationship with the land in the sense of a co-production of a shared world, the settler approach is historically grounded in scientific, mathematical data collection and guided by the endeavor to master the surrounding world. It is detached through an aerial perspective and oriented towards future outcomes such as settlement development and production. While the indigenous map is based on an engagement with a particular place in a specific time, creating a sense of vibrant geography actualized through the act of traveling, settler cartography assumes that the objects in the world are real when they are objective and independent from the cartographer, leading to maps that are ethnocentric images producing an empty land, of unexploited resources and opportunity. This notion of neutrality is of course an illusion that relies on a colonial ideology. Since the mid-19th century, the longitudes and latitudes of the common, abstract grid have been modeled according to physical space-time synchronization with the chronometer on the Greenwich Prime Meridian at the Royal Observatory in London. The grid is thus a direct historical outcome of colonial British maritime power. Instead of territorial neutrality, the settlers' maps ultimately bear within them an emblem of violent colonial conquest. Like maps, curatorial projects are social constructions, narrative spaces that shape our understanding of place and space. In Boris Groys's estimation, every exhibition tells a story by directing the viewer through the exhibition in a particular order. The exhibition space is always a narrative space, he says. From this perspective, we can see how Neufeld's description of the two histories of map-making also suggests two approaches to curatorial practice. If traditional museums have organized artifacts according to a particular history, in fact, using the artifacts to support and represent that very history and construct a particular identity, contemporary curatorial practice can work to become more vulnerable and attentive to radically different and differentiated decisions and actions that create meaning in place. This trajectory finds a compelling resonance with Deleuze-Guattari's concept of a smooth space, particularly when curatorial projects are designed as, and this is a quote from Deleuze-Guattari, as an amorphous collection of juxtaposed pieces that can be joined together in an infinite number of ways, and that of course resonates with the Dymaxion map that I showed earlier. Operating from within the tentative territory of a smooth space, a curator-cartographer can partake in making palpable worlds moved by fluxes and intensities more than by clear-cut, easy-to-grasp subject-object relations. Moving islands. The exhibition journeys how traveling fruit, ideas, and buildings rearrange our environment, held at the Canadian Centre for Architecture in 2010-11, is an exemplary case of a curatorial approach that amorphously juxtaposed a number of different spaces, a thematic exhibition with different rooms and subtopics, a book composed of theory disguised as short stories, a web platform, and a series of live events, while fostering a sense of both navigational openness and conceptual connectedness. Curated by Giovanna Borassi and designed by Martin Beck, Journeys confronted the phenomenon of global transformation and hybridization precisely by imagining the production of space through displacement, dislocation, and movement. Borassi and her curatorial team considered how our physical surroundings are incessantly subjected to exchange processes occurring across architectural, environmental, and geopolitical planes, triggering material changes which ultimately feed back into shaping the realities of the people affected. In order to invite visitors to navigate this assemblage, the exhibition was organized as a compilation of 15 thematic narrative zones, visually distinguished by a color scheme and mapped out according to a glossary of 15 concepts, serving as frames for the case studies. The exhibits themselves included a diverse array of archival documents, museological and mundane objects, antique books, maquettes, maps, films, videos, illustrations, art photography, and, faithfully to its title, even a coconut drifting through ocean currents. It was through this diversity and unconventional composition that the exhibition could provoke discoveries based on tensions, correlations, and curiosities. While Deleuze and Guattari were developing their innovative spatio-philosophical concepts of smooth and strided space in 1,000 plateaus, the difference between the ideology of the modernist white cube, as articulated by Brian Doherty, and the decentering strategies of Lucy Lippard, based on the work of Dan Graham and Robert Smithson, among others, was being argued in the realms of art theory and scholarship. Echoing the critique of the illusionary construction of settlers' maps, O'Doherty argued in a series of essays published in Art Forum that the white cube of the modernist gallery space is built upon an illusion of neutrality. Unquote. The white wall's apparent neutrality is an illusion. It stands for community with common ideas and assumptions. The development of the pristine, placeless white cube is one of modernism's triumphs, a development commercial, aesthetic, and technological. Accordingly, the art displayed in the context of this void is set apart from the world and can seemingly take on its own life, existing independently from social, historical, or political contingencies. What really is the case, however, is that the architecture of the white cube becomes a frame, a grid structure, that signifies the affirmation and unification of certain ideas and values, by excluding a great number of others. This exclusionary aspect is something the feminist thinker and curator Lucy Lippard has confronted in her curatorial work. Reminiscent of the vibrant geography acknowledged and produced through indigenous mapping techniques, Lippard's practice sees sites and places as crucial elements of meaningful art practice. In her words, art that illuminates its location rather than just occupying its place. So in Lucy,
I'm sorry, 1 second. Tom, I have to mute you because I think there's an echo coming through.
In Lippard's words, art that illuminates its location rather than just occupying it is place-specific, incorporating people and economic and historical forces as well as topography. It usually takes place outside of conventional venues that entice audiences through publicity and fashion. It is not closeted in white cubes, accessible only when admission is paid or boundaries are breached. It is not readable only to those in the know. It makes places mean more to those who live or spend time in them. Like in the two types of mapping described by Neufeld, or the concepts of smooth and striated space in Deleuze and Guattari, the difference of Lippard is signaled by her emphatic refusal of the alleged objectivity or neutrality of the gallery space. In comparing the roles of the cartographer and the curator, we might now ask more directly, what does Antillean philosopher Edouard Glissant mean when he says, I imagine the museum as an archipelago? Essential to Glissant's notion of the archipelago is the idea of a fragmented territory that cannot be reconciled under a collective identity, but which instead must accept individual identities as the diverse multiplicities which they always are. Like a Damaxian map, a moving island story map, or a Polynesian stick chart, the curator operates on the institution to make it leak. Curatorial practice, as a cartography of the fluid, works to create a decentered space that does not operate according to absoluteness, objectivity, or synthesis, but rather invites a multiplicity of interconnections brought about by conjecture, memory, sensation, excess, and reflexivity. In moving towards this curatorial invitation, we could do worse than to appropriate James Corner's description of mapping as our own cartographic guide. As both analog and abstraction, then, the surface of the map functions like an operating table, a staging ground for or a theater of operations upon which the mapper collects, combines, connects, marks, masks, relates, and generally explores. These surfaces are massive collections, sorting, and transfer sites, great fields upon which real material conditions are isolated, indexed, and placed within an assortment of relational structures. So if the curator acts as a cartographer, then mapping becomes her technique, and the map can be understood as the product of her work. This would not be limited to floor plans, didactics, or curatorial statements. Such a method is inclusive of the curatorial practice as a mode of knowledge production. In other words, the curator as cartographer establishes an attitude towards the world that partakes in making the world. Like a voyage through interminably moving islands, curatorial practice, to be effective, as a navigational practice, would necessarily become vulnerable to physical contact, improbable exchange, and collaborative experimentation. Such vulnerabilities would undoubtedly lead the curator far away from the safety of the illusionary horizon of representation, which is all the better for the construction of fictions, both real and imagined. And here, hope that did not put you all to sleep. How do I come back here?
No, it's very interesting. Keep going.
How do I get back into camera mode?
Okay, so you can say stop presenting in the Hangout, or you can
Oh,
just
down here.
click the.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was looking at the wrong screen. Okay. So as I was reading this, actually, having close read the Bennett and myself in preparation for the class, I really think that would be great for next time if we read the Bennett and it on the highway, and then we can see where kind of the trajectory from a historical critique of a traditional museum setup is what Bennett is looking at, and then this contemporary independent curatorial perspective onto onto the institution, but also of course onto those legacies of critique. And yeah, I'm excited to show you next time the exhibition project that I realized in the summer in Jakarta, because then I think it'll become more clear what I mean by curatorial practice as being something that plays with the idea of the archipelago, of the fluid and the solid, and this heterogeneity of discourses and objects and people gathered in one space, as well as the fluidity between the disciplines. So if you remember, Olivia, you read that, where Bennett talks about the museum as a mechanism for representing the new academic disciplines, biology and evolutionary display, geology and the fossil display, archaeology and the historical narration of civilization. And so in that show that we did in the summer, we worked with 13 artists that made new work based on a vast historical archive that we produced kind of for them and with them about a 19th century British explorer, Professor Wallace, who worked in Indonesia for 8 years in the mid-19th century. And then we also had the great luck to collaborate with the Indonesian Institute of Science for this exhibition, and they loaned us natural history specimens corresponding to the collection that Wallace collected. I'll tell you more about that next time, but corresponding to the specimens that he collected in the region at the time. And so in the space, which in the end looked very much like a natural history exhibition, but kind of functioned entirely differently. There was much more going on in the space, and it was never this linear narrative that Bennett talks about in terms of the historical ordering of artifacts or people or discourses. Yeah, and so I look forward to unpacking that with you guys more and seeing what we can do with that. Sound good? Do you want to, you feel free to speak up and respond to the text, and you both read it too, so it would be great to hear you come back in on that.
I guess, like, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess hearing it this time, it sort of brought to mind a couple different things that I don't know, I was just kind of curious if anyone had any thoughts on connections between. One was Hito Stiles' essay in Freefall, don't know if anyone has read that, where she talks about the horizon line and cartography as like a form of imposing colonialist values onto land, and then sort of like that we might be moving into a different form of perception, like with all of these images becoming aerial, which is like another discussion, but to me it related a lot to your text. And also there's this book project called, I think the title is Intruders, and the subtitle might be like Artist in the Ethnography Museum or something like that. But it was this, has anyone seen the, I kind of happened to find this book at like in the bottom shelf of a used bookstore. But it was this project in the Netherlands that happened when, because of their policy when they were doing construction on this ethnography museum, they had to include a certain amount of contemporary art into the building. And so they started inviting all these.
In Belgium, not in the Netherlands.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of years since I read it. Yeah. So you've seen this, right?
Yeah,
so,
I know.
So they like started inviting all these artists, and then there was this controversy over it, and so the book instead like sort of works through all of these different conversations that happened around it. Yeah. So I don't know. I just thought, I guess this made me think a lot about that, because I mean I feel like that book is sort of an exhibition in a way, or it's like this alternative to a way of navigating a museum and kind of disrupting that, the Natural History Museum or the Ethnography Museum.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. In fact, the first project in that way that I did engage with the Ethnographic Museum. It was in 2012 with a group of other curators at the Leipzig Ethnographic Museum, and we were invited to work with the photography archive from the 1920s, anthropological photography, but then the photographer or the ethnographer turned out to be like a race theorist who in the 30s worked very closely towards the Nazi ideology, and so as curators in that scenario, we felt that we couldn't possibly just produce a show that stages those images, which is what the curators at the museum asked us effectively to do at the beginning. And then we developed an exhibition that was titled The Subjective Object. And so we developed this kind of more like a meta show on the museum as a mechanism for vision, exactly, a technology of vision, in a sense that Bennett also talks about. And it's interesting you bring that up, because I think I've tilted more towards the Natural History Museum also for the preparation of the seminar. But if you're interested, we can totally talk about ethnographic questions as well, because I have a lot of reading that we could do about that, but I kind of didn't decide for that for the first session. Yeah, no, but of course the top-down view that you mentioned with satellite imagery and those technologies now, and the whole Earth images since the 70s. So there is a contemporary rendering of those viewpoints, but what I was talking about, or how I was looking at that in the museum as archipelago, as more historically, is the settler cartography that comes over a space. It does come over a space kind of from above, as if this was a territory that's empty, and you lay the grid on it, and then you occupy it, and you look at it apparently objectively, versus these other positions that are always inside, kind of on the space already, and have a relational experience with and of the space. And so the map doesn't doesn't go all the way to the horizon line necessarily, but has a much more close encounter. And so as a blueprint for a curatorial role, on the one hand you could say traditional curators that care for museological objects and for these master histories produces a sense of objectivity over these objects, whereas the suggestion that I'm making is that it's interesting to look at what other movements you can generate engaging with the materials, as well as those what I call entangled legacies. Yeah. Anyone else wants to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm familiar with, like, vaguely familiar with the Anthropocene. I guess I'd like to hear you maybe talk more about that and how that relates to, like, aiming for a destabilizing experience, or destabilizing or decentering the distinction between nature and culture. Yeah.
Okay, maybe maybe next session when I'll prepare that for next session, and I can then I could select some readings for the second session where we can go into that more if you'd like. Yeah? Great.
Yeah, that's also, I was just going to say that's something I've been reading a lot about too, so I'm happy to spend as much time as we decide to talking about that as well and reading about it.
Okay, awesome. Great. All right. How are we doing? Yeah. Shall we meet next week then? Tony? Moderator? Boss?
No, sorry, I just couldn't get my microphone back on.
I'm the one late.
Yes, we meet next week, same time, 4 o'clock. We did about an hour today, so we meet for hour and a half next week, and then we can continue. So that would be the 23rd, right? Then the 30th, you're out of town, correct?
Right, on the 30th, I'm in the air. I'm on a plane at that time.
Okay. So the 23rd we'll continue with to finish this session, so the hour and a half session. Then the 30th we will not have class, and then the 7th and the 14th and the 21st would be 2.5 hour classes. So that adds the 21st onto the schedule, if that's okay with Kayla and Olivia.
I actually, on my schedule, I already had that one. It was just that we didn't have class on the 7th, but I'm happy to add it. I had the dates from the Facebook page.
Do you not have this? Can you do the 7th, Sophie, just to make sure?
I was gonna do it on the 7th.
Okay, so 7th, 14th, 21st, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
But I think that if we, for next time, if we will have visited shows, prepare that, done reading, can talk about the reading, there will be a lot of material for us to have an engaged back and forth next week that might well cover more than an hour and a half. So I'd be up for doing that. So we'll have 3 long sessions, and then we can see if we need the 21st, and if we can do kind of a wrap up on the 21st. That would be half of the session, for example.
Okay. Okay, so plan for a normal session at the minimum hour and a half.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Olivia, are you okay with that extra date, or did you also plan for the 21st?
Yeah, it should be fine. I'll probably be able to get work off. So
Okay.
should be fine.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Sophie. Go.
Do you reckon the other 2 participants are gonna join next time?
So yes, we actually got a message from the one saying she was not able to make it today. I'm trying to get the actual message. Yeah, but then hopefully she says that she had recent events occurred, but she'll try to make it to the next session. And the other one is a South African student, and I'm wondering if the time was screwed up, so I'm going to contact her over the week. But it should be fine. They should join.
Okay, great. Because I think the more we have, the easier it is also to do longer. Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. Very nice to meet you all.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.